Okay. Let me explain some preface about what's happening with this. The reason that I began lecturing at this is because I had never finished the religion classes from my Con Law 2 class. I see some students from my Con Law 2 class here. Obviously, you know this. It is one among several subjects we actually never got to in my Con Law 2 class. My understanding is that the other Con Law 2 classes, from what the instructors tell me anyway, they go over every single page in the entire case book by the end of the semester. I can't do that. I've never done that. So this is one of those glaring areas that I've never covered. I started to give reviews for the religion classes to my students alone. Over time, Barbara Singer has heard about this, and she said, can you give it to the other students? I think it might be redundant for those students who've had other professors. You probably have learned this before, am I right? The religion classes? Yes. You know how to do this already. I think it would be somewhat redundant for you, and I regret that. But unfortunately, this is the setting, and we're going to go over it. If you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and ask at any time. How to use the review is basically meant to help you with sort of a basic understanding of the religion clauses. There are obviously much more things with regard to the religion clauses that you should know. We're only going to go over the absolute basics. And one of the reasons why we're only going to go over the absolute basics is because you already have a lot on your plate as far as getting ready for the bar is concerned. Plus, assuming that Barbie or whoever is doing their job correctly, you should already have an instructor who's gone over most of the religion stuff for you. So we're going to go over the bare basics of this, especially for my students who never had the opportunity to learn this in class. The religion clauses, there are two of them. Both of them can be found in the very first sentence of the very first amendment of your United States Constitution. The religion clauses, both of them, there's two of them, both of them can be found in the very first sentence of the very first amendment of your United States Constitution. And the religion clauses basically say the following. It says that Congress shall not establish religion nor prohibit the free exercise thereof. I've written that for you in the outline. There's no notes for you to take whatsoever. There are no notes for you to take, unless you want to. It's totally up to you. But I've written all this down in the outline for you. Congress shall not establish religion, nor prohibit the free exercise thereof. There's two of them, and notice that there are two. Congress shall not establish religion. There's your first. There's your first. Congress shall not establish religion. That's called the Establishment Clause. Congress shall not establish religion. That's called the Establishment Clause. Nor prohibit the free exercise thereof. That's called a Free Exercise Clause. Nor prohibit the free exercise thereof. That's called a Free Exercise Clause. There's two of them in there. And they do different things. And listen up again what they do. Congress shall not establish religion. That's the first one. Nor prohibit the free exercise thereof. They do two different things. We're going to talk about exactly what those two things mean and how to deal with them on the bar exam. First thing, if you see an establishment clause or free exercise question on the bar exam, and it's an essay exam, you notice that both clauses pertain to Congress. What do you do if you see a law like passed by the city of Miami that seems to be regarding religion? Because the two clauses, they're about Congress. What do? Here's what you do. You cite the cases where the Supreme Court extended the religion clauses to state and local governments. You cite the cases in which the United States Supreme Court extended the religion clauses to state and local governments. Those two cases are as follows. Cantwell versus Connecticut for the free exercise clause, that was passed in 1940. Cantwell versus Connecticut, that was passed in 1940. And then Everson versus School Board, that was passed in 1947. That does that for the Establishment Clause. Everson versus School Board was passed in 1947 by the U.S. Supreme Court. That extends the Establishment Clause to the state and local governments. Here's what you do. So if you have a state or local law which seems to be infringing on someone's free exercise clause rights, here's what you do. Very first sentence, go ahead and recite the free exercise clause. It says, Congress shall not inhibit the free exercise of religion, period. You say the First Amendment states that Congress shall not infringe the free exercise of religion, period. You say the First Amendment says Congress shall not inhibit the free exercise of religion, period. And then you say the Supreme Court extended this amendment to the state and local governments. The Supreme Court extended this amendment to the state and local governments. Cantwell versus Connecticut. The Supreme Court extended this amendment to state and local governments, Cantwell versus Connecticut. Just say that. So remember, whenever you have a free exercise clause question, go ahead and cite the free exercise clause. Say that the First Amendment states that Congress shall not infringe the right of religious free exercise, period. The Supreme Court extended the First Amendment right to state and local governments, Cantwell versus Connecticut. Congress extended the First Amendment right of religious free exercise to state and local governments, Cantwell versus Connecticut. There's your second sentence. Always do it that way. Establishment clause the other way. If you have an establishment clause question on the final exam and it's the state or local government that passed that law, here's what you say. Congress shall not establish religion according to the First Amendment. Congress shall not establish religion according to the First Amendment, period. Next sentence. The U.S. Supreme Court extended the establishment clause to state and local laws, Everson versus School Board. The U.S. Supreme Court extended the establishment clause to state and local governments, Everson versus School Board. Those are your first two sentences. If you have a free exercise clause, say the language we talked about just a second ago. If you have establishment clause, do the stuff we just talked about right afterwards. Does everyone understand that? Okay, good. Very easy. Don't list points for that. Everyone can get points for that. You'll be surprised how many students on the bar exam, they actually won't say that. They'll go right into the question, and it won't be clear exactly which amendment that they're talking about. Make sure you say it that way. Don't lose points on that. Let me explain to you first how the free exercise clause works. And again, I regret that for those who are not my students, this is going to be old hat for you. You'll be familiar with it. But for my students, this will be somewhat new. Free exercise clause, this is the way it works. Again, it says, Congress shall not infringe the free exercise of religion. Congress shall not infringe the free exercise of religion. Now, what exactly does that mean? We know it extends to state and local laws as well. What exactly does that mean? Very simple way to understand it. This was not always the case, but in 1990, the U.S. Supreme Court came up with a brand new law. In 1990, the U.S. Supreme Court came up with a brand new law which interpreted the free exercise clause. Very easy to understand. Listen up first. There's nothing to write. It's already in your outline. Listen up first. Here's what the U.S. Supreme Court said. If a religious group and a non-religious group are treated exactly the same, that law, which treats them exactly the same, is going to be subject to rational review. Just like that. If a state or local law or a federal law, if it treats a religious group and a non-religious group exactly the same, it's going to be subject to rational review. It's going to be subject to rational review. And almost for sure that law is going to pass. And almost for sure that law is going to pass. Again, if you have a law which treats a religious group and a non-religious group exactly the same, that law is going to be subject to rational review. It's going to be treated almost exact. It's going to be subject to rational review, and almost for sure the law is going to pass. Now, on the other hand, though, if the law treats a religious group and a non-religious group differently, specifically, if it discriminates against a religious group, but it doesn't afford that same discrimination to the secular group, the non-religious group, that's going to be subject to strict scrutiny. If the state or local government, or if the federal government, if it discriminates against a religious group, but does not discriminate in the same way against the non-religious group, that's going to be subject to strict scrutiny. That's going to be subject to strict scrutiny. And almost for sure it's going to be struck down. And almost for sure it's going to be struck down. Let me give you some examples of how you can tell the difference between the two. Here's one easy example. It's actually, both examples are going to be from Florida, South Florida, actually. One will be famous, and the other one will be less famous. The first one I'm going to get to, the less famous one. This is from South Florida, about 10 years ago. The Department of Motor Vehicles in South Florida hires many people, as you know. And one of the requirements for all employees is not to engage in behavior that will be unreasonably disruptive with regard to other employees during work time. Do not engage in behavior that's unreasonably disruptive of the workplace. There was a person in the late 1990s who was working for the Florida Department of Motor Vehicles. He was in charge of taking your picture and having you fill out the forms and such. Now, during lunchtime, this person just seemed to behave like any other person, but over time something had changed. That person started to have conversations with his coworkers and started to say things like, how do you feel about cats? Do you like cats? And the coworker said, yeah, we like cats. Yeah, they're fine. And I worship cats as like deities, as gods. I worship them, and I wanted to share my faith with you. Would you be interested in joining me as part of this religion? And they said, no, we're not interested. And the guy said, okay, that's fine. Then he started bringing cat food to the cafeteria at the DMV office and started eating out of the cat food cans. And he started bringing pictures of cats and putting them up on his locker room. And he started praying to cats when he was eating. Now, after a while, his supervisor confronted him and said, hey, I want you to stop doing that, because you're making everyone uncomfortable in the DMV office. And the rule is, we do not want people who are hired by the DMV to engage in unreasonable behavior that will be needlessly distracting, needlessly discomforting to their employees. I want you to stop doing that. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? And he literally responded to his supervisor's request with the following words, meow. Now, that's how the case ended. That's how the case ended. He took the case to court and said the following argument. And look at the structure of his argument. He said that his employee, the Florida Department of Motor Vehicles, was discriminating against him because he was religious. Watch the law at issue, and here's how you would frame it. The law at issue says that no one at the DMV office may engage in unreasonably distracting behavior with regard to their coworkers. Now, do you think that law treats religious people and non-religious people exactly the same? It does. It obviously does. That law is going to be subject to rational review. And as everyone here knows by now, under rational review, what's the legitimate government interest? We want the workplace to be a comfortable environment where let's just get through the day without any trouble, okay, guys? Let's just do our business, punch the clock at 5 o'clock, just make sure, just not try to harass anyone or make anyone comfortable. Let's just have a good, efficient working place. That's the legitimate government purpose. Are the means rationally related to prevent people from talking about strange religions which will make their coworkers uncomfortable during the cafeteria time? Yes, the means chosen are rationally related. The law is totally fine. That's an example of a law that treated religious people and non-religious people exactly the same. Now, what's an example of a law that did not do that? This also takes place in Florida, in Hialeah, in fact. The city of Hialeah. For those of you who've had other professors, I'm sure you're familiar with this. It's the Church of the Lukumi Baba Luai versus the city of Hialeah case. Let me give you the facts. The Santeria religion, this is sort of a Caribbean so-called voodoo religion, they were starting to attract members in the city of Hialeah. And one of the things that the members did, the group did, was they needed to sacrifice animals as part of their ritual. The idea was that by slitting the throats of the doves and the goats, that the evil spirits which were intimidating and making life miserable for the members would somehow be satisfied, and they would stop doing that to these people. Now, as you can imagine, they were doing this in people's backyards. And grabbing a goat with both hands and holding that goat down as you're slitting the throat of that goat, the goat's going to scream. There's going to be blood everywhere. It's not a very happy environment. The neighbors are getting very upset by this, and the doves that are caught, and it's just extremely upsetting for the neighbors. The city of Hialeah, the city council, and the mayor get together, and they pass the following law. Listen to the law. It says that no animals may be sacrificed in the city of Hialeah for the purposes of religious sacrifice. It said that no animals may be killed in the city of Hialeah for the purposes of religious sacrifice. Do you think that law treats religious people and non-religious people exactly the same? No, it doesn't. It obviously does not. Because look at the language that said that no animals may be killed for purposes of religious sacrifice. But if you want to go kill them for like some kind of secular, like crazy teenage sacrifice, you go ahead and do that in Hialeah. You just can't do that in the name of some kind of like God or something in Hialeah. It does not treat the religious people and non-religious people the same. It treats them differently. That's going to be subject to strict scrutiny. And if you're wondering what's going to happen under strict scrutiny, think about it. We go through the reasoning. Is there a compelling government interest? Hialeah wants to make life miserable for the people who are participating in the Santeria religion. They're trying to express hate and contempt for the members of the Santeria religion. That is not a compelling government interest. That is not a compelling government interest. That's spreading hate. That is not a compelling government interest. That's spread of prejudice. If they could have rewritten the law, they probably should have along the following lines, saying that no animal under any circumstances may be sacrificed in the city of Hialeah unless the city provides some type of permission for them for some medical purpose, like animal research, for example. But no animal may be sacrificed for any purpose in the city of Hialeah without the city's permission for some reasonable purpose. They could have passed that law, but they didn't. Under strict scrutiny, it would be struck down because there's no compelling interest. Those are sort of two examples we're thinking about. Employment Division versus Smith. Let me talk about this. And when we get to when we get to a case similar to this, in Thomas versus Review Board, do remind me how they're different, because I think it's a good exercise for students. But first, Employment Division versus Smith, one more example. This was the case that created the rule in 1990 saying that as long as you treat religious people and non-religious people exactly the same, the law will be subject to rational review under the Free Exercise Clause. The facts were as follows. Employment Division versus Smith in 1990. Mr. Smith is a member of the Native American Church. As part of the practices of the Native American Church, he and his members get together in some part of the forest. This is in Oregon, and they smoke peyote, which is kind of a mild carcinogen. It's a mild carcinogen. And they get together and they smoke peyote. In the state of Oregon, smoking peyote is a criminal offense. It is against the law. And you can't smoke it for any reason, whether it's for a religious reason or non-religious reason. You just can't do it. You just can't do it. It's a criminal offense. He does this, and the problem is not that he gets caught. He actually does not get caught. The problem is that it's his job. He works as a drug rehab counselor. And so his employer tells him, do you smoke an illegal substance, even though you're a drug rehab counselor in Oregon? And he says, yes, it's part of my religious practices. You know what? Pack up your things. You're gone. You can't, I mean, think about it. How can you be a role model? And just no, go. And so he's fired from his job. He sues. He goes to the Oregon Unemployment Office and says, "Can I collect unemployment benefits?" And the unemployment office says, "You may not collect unemployment benefits because you committed a crime. You confessed to having committed a crime. We're not going to reward you for being fired because you committed a crime." We only give unemployment benefits to those people who did not commit a crime, who were laid off for some other reason, but not because they committed a crime. He sues the unemployment office, saying they violated his religious free exercise clause rights under the First Amendment. So this is how you would organize it on the final exam. First thing we do is we cite the free exercise clause. The First Amendment states that Congress shall not infringe a person's right of religious free exercise. The U.S. Supreme Court extended that rule in Cantwell versus Connecticut to state and local governments, like the Oregon Unemployment Division. The question is, the Oregon Unemployment Division, did they treat religious people and non-religious people exactly the same by denying unemployment benefits to Smith? What do you think? Their rationale was as follows. We're denying unemployment benefits because he committed a crime. Are they treating people who are religious and non-religious exactly the same? They would deny unemployment benefits for anyone who committed a crime. Exactly. The unemployment benefits, the denial of the unemployment benefits, it was denied to him not because of his religion, but because he had committed a crime. If he had killed someone, if he had smoked a peyote, not for religious reasons, but for secular reasons, he still would have been denied the unemployment benefits. The denial of the unemployment benefits is subject to rational review. Is there a legitimate government interest? Yes, we do not want to encourage crime in the state of Oregon. Are the means rationally related? Yes, because if we give him the money, we're encouraging him, we're applauding him for having committed a crime. So we don't want to do that. It's struck down. The law is upheld under rational review. The law is upheld under rational review. Let's go ahead and take a look at, yes.
Let me ask a question. I'm going to challenge a little bit of question.
Sure, of course.
Let's assume for a moment that smoking peyote is a substantial part of the person's religion, and let's compare that to laws that say one is not allowed to drink any alcoholic beverages before they're 18, and yet in most Christian religions, children are allowed to take wine at church, right? Why cannot somebody be fired at the government office for allowing their children to drink alcoholic beverages when it's excluded by law?
Oh, very good question. Very good question. My response to that is less law and more sort of the administration of law, in the sense that with regard to the peyote, smoking the peyote, this belongs to a very sort of like outlier, strange, eccentric religious group in the Native American church in the eyes of most Americans. Yeah. The Catholic majority, the cops are pretty much looking the other way.
Yeah, well, the Lulu Church, whatever in Hialeah, is pretty extreme also, but that receives strict scrutiny, so it doesn't make sense to me. As a legal matter, it does not make sense. As a functional matter, they're kind of just looking the other way.
So there's no legal answer to that, if it makes sense. The same kids who are taking wine and Catholic Sunday services, those kids, some of those kids' dads are cops in the Miami-Dade Police Department, and they don't care, because that's the way they grew up, and that's just the way it's gonna go. So it's kind of a double standard in that sense. Let's go through some of these examples over here. This is on page 2. Take a look at this. Take a look at these examples, and let's see if you can get them. I'm sure you guys can. First example, we have Ted. He believes that Satan commands him to kill people. Florida has a prohibition against murder. It doesn't care whether you're killing people because of God or Satan, or whether you're doing it for purely secular reasons. If Ted is convicted of murder, he can't overturn his conviction because he was prosecuted under a law that treated religious and non-religious people in the same way. Neither party may murder. Does everyone understand that? General prohibition. Here's another case. This is actually from a real case called Ling, U.S. Supreme Court case. You had the United States Department of Interior who wanted to exercise its Fifth Amendment takings powers and basically take land away from this Native American group, but give them just compensation for doing so. The Native Americans made the argument that, you know that ground you're trying to take away from us by giving us fair compensation for the land? Our ancestors, they're buried in that ground. And so we don't want you to take it because you're destroying their souls and spirits. So that's why the land is non-negotiable. I don't care about your fair compensation. You may not take the land because you were violating a religious free exercise clause rights. The court upheld the taking, basically said, you know what, they're not taking the land because you're religious. Even if you weren't religious, they would still taken your land. They would have taken the land whoever it belonged to, whatever the reason. So again, you have an instance in which a religious group and a non-religious group were treated exactly the same. Watch for on the final exam some type of example where there's a religious group that you'll be heartbroken and you're trying to reach out to save those people because you think it just ain't right. You know, this kind of this kind of reaction. Watch for that because they like to put that in because there'll always be that kid. There's always that one kid every semester I teach. Every semester, and it's always a boy. There'll be that one kid who said, I will not let this go. And you know, don't let it go. Tiger, go for it. On the bar exam, go for it. Go to the defense of that group, whatever you want. But the bar examiners, they devised it like that. It's a lot like the MPRE for those of you who've recently taken it. They'll create some insane scenario in which you just think, I wish the lawyer had an opportunity to tell the proper authorities where this kid has been kidnapped by my client. It's the same scenario. Don't fall for that. These people are imaginary. They're just in some hypothetical. Don't go to the defense. Okay, don't worry about it. No one's going to die if you choose to stay side, okay? Another example, this is actually from Broward County I read about 2 years ago. Kara is a high priestess of a religion that requires new members to be for sex with Kara in order to retain membership. Kara is prosecuted for prostitution. May she overturn her conviction as a violation of the free exercise clause. No, can't do it because the law obviously applies to both religious people and non-religious people. This is actually a true example from Broward. Next example, the IRS will exempt all charitable organizations except churches. This violates the free exercise clause. Does everyone see that? If the IRS said, we're going to give charity exemptions to all organizations except the church, that obviously treats churches differently. It's discrimination. As of now, all groups which have legal charity status, they can get some type of exemption from the IRS. The law defines marriage as between one man and one woman. A fringe Mormon group of 3 want to marry. Does that violate the free exercise clause? This is a little bit trickier. Probably no, because you can imagine scenarios in which a non-religious group want to marry, like one guy and like 2 women who are not religious want to get married. They can't do it under that law. Does everyone see that? It doesn't matter whether you're a Mormon or not, although in a scenario like this, it's more probable in some parts of the United States that it might be a Mormon group. The law on its face, it applies to religious people and non-religious people exactly the same. There's only one case we talked about, the city of Lukumi. There's only one religious case actually in the history of the U.S. Supreme Court where the court found that it was explicitly targeting one religious group. Since 1990, that's been the only case, since 1990. Also, this is something we should talk about. This is a little trickier. Yoder versus Wisconsin. Watch for this on the bar exam. I said that as long as the law treats religious people and non-religious people exactly the same, it'll be subject to rational review. There are 2 exceptions to that. Watch for that on the bar exam. Because that's usually where the bar likes to test this in the exceptions. Watch for 2 exceptions to that. The first exception is called the so-called hybrid exception. Hybrid exception. And again, this is all in your notes. Nothing to write down unless you want to. The hybrid exception goes as follows. If the plaintiff can successfully argue that the law is violating her first free exercise clause rights plus some other right, then she can win on free exercise clause grounds too. Let me repeat that. If the plaintiff can successfully argue that the law is discriminating against her on both free exercise clause grounds and some other constitutional right, then the court will let her win on free exercise clause grounds too. Okay, here's an example of something like that. Yoder versus Wisconsin, this was the case that established that rule. Wisconsin has a very boring rule, which every state in the United States has. It says that until the age of 12, you have to go to either a public school or a private school that's been accredited by the local school district. Every single state in the union has the same law. The difference is that in Wisconsin, there are these extreme Amish people living there. They're actually not even part of the mainstream Amish group. They're the old order Amish. Does everyone know what the Amish are? Big, tall, black hats, black suits, white shirts. They ride in buggies. That's sort of the stereotypical view. They live together. They don't go out of their community and so forth. Wisconsin says that everyone has to attend school until they're 12 years old. They have to attend a public school or a private school that's been accredited by the local school district. Now Yoder, Mr. Yoder, he doesn't want to send his boy to the public school or a private school that's been accredited by the local school district. Instead, here's what he wants to do. He wants to keep little Ezekiel on the Amish community. He wants to keep him on the Amish community. And here's why. Mr. Yoder fears, maybe for good reason, he fears that if his boy goes to the local school district, he's going to become like morally corrupt. Specifically, if he goes to the local school district, he's going to learn how to curse, learn about like MTV and Miley Cyrus and all these other like disgusting things in the world and so on. I'm serious. That's where Wisconsin versus Yoder came from. He's worried that his boy's going to become morally corrupt and become, want to marry Miley, want to be Miley. That's what he's afraid of. That's what he's afraid of. So he doesn't want to send the child there. The case goes up before the U.S. Supreme Court, and this is what happens. First of all, Mr. Yoder makes the free exercise clause argument. He says that law, which requires children to attend either a public school or a private school accredited by the local school district, that law infringes my right to religious free exercise. Do you think that law treats religious people and non-religious people differently? Not at all. Not at all. It applies to everybody. He's out of luck there. So he has to combine it with something else. And the other thing that he combines it with is, if you remember, the 14th Amendment due process clause says that no state or local government shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. You know that phrase, liberty, life, liberty, or property without due process of law? The phrase liberty contains the right of parents to be able to raise their children as they see fit. Does everyone remember that? This is from Pierce versus Society of Sisters, also from Yoder, Mayor versus Nebraska. This is the right of parents to be able to teach their kids as they see fit. Now, Mr. Yoder is going to combine that right, the right of parents to be able to teach their kids, with the free exercise clause right, his right as an Amish person. He's going to combine this right with that right, and therefore the court says, okay, since you put it that way by combining it, I'm going to recognize your free exercise clause right. I'm going to also recognize your liberty clause right. This is what's known as a hybrid example, and this is one exception to the general rule that if a state treats religious people and non-religious people exactly the same, it'll be subject to rational review. This is one exception to it. Does everyone understand that? For my students, do you guys understand that? Yeah, because I know they covered it already, so they know. But do you guys understand? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yes, you would apply strict scrutiny. And what is the compelling government interest? Oh, good. Good question. Is there a compelling government interest? Wisconsin is going to say, well, we want the kids to have a certain level of competence with regard to learning and their verbal and math skills and so on to become good citizens. Now, Chief Justice Berger, who wrote the majority opinion for Yoder, this is what he said. He said that is a compelling government interest. I'm going to grant you that. The means chosen, though, they ain't necessary. The means chosen, they ain't necessary. And he said the following: they ain't necessary because what you say competence, like to know stuff, right? Like when you grow up. And this is what Berger said in the case. Chief Justice Berger says, okay, these kids, they're going to grow up in an Amish community. What do they need to know? They need to know things like how to take care of a horse, how to take care of agriculture, how to live without electricity or running water. They ain't going to learn that from no public school. They're going to learn that on the farm with the other Amish. So the means chosen here, saying they got to go to a public school or a private school that's been accredited, those are not necessary for these kids. In fact, it's going in the wrong direction for these kids. Let them stay on the farm. Let them learn on the farm. So he struck it down under strict scrutiny. Make sense? Quizzo, make sense? Yeah? Okay. That's the first exception. And this is the second exception. And this, we're going to go back to Oregon Employment Division versus Smith in just one sec. Thomas versus Review Board. This is the second exception. In a nutshell, this is the second exception. Even though the law treats religious people and non-religious people exactly the same, that law can still be subject to strict scrutiny. It can still be overturned if, is the other exception, if it forces that religious person, you want to choose between worshiping your God or you want to choose to have a living. You want to choose to be able to eat. Let me repeat that. If it forces that person to basically choose, you want to be able to worship your God or you want to have the means to be able to eat. The means to be able to eat. Here's what I mean by that. Thomas versus Review Board, these were the facts. Thomas was denied unemployment benefits after he quit his job for religious reasons. Thomas was a Jehovah's Witness who quit his job for religious reasons, and then he went to go get himself some unemployment benefits. The unemployment office asked him, why did you quit? And then he told them the religious reasons for why he quit. And then the unemployment office says, that ain't going to do. We're not going to give you the unemployment benefits. The Supreme Court overturned that decision as violating the Free Exercise Clause. Why? Here's why. You can't force a religious person to choose between you're going to worship your God or you're going to eat. You can never force someone to do that because it's too much of a pressure. It's too much pressure. You can never force someone to either worship their God or choose between unemployment benefits. You can't force a person to choose between God and unemployment benefits. Choose between God and employment benefits. Because it's too coercive in nature. You're forcing that person, well, I guess if you want unemployment benefits because you got to eat, I guess you can't believe in your God then, right? You can't do that. You can never do that. That goes beyond all bounds of what's right. You can't do that. Yes?
And is that applicable for any religion, whether you worship a cat as your God or Jehovah's Witness, which is a little bit more recognized?
Good question. First of all, the faith itself has to constitute a religion. And not everything in the world will constitute a religion. Like worshiping, one person worshiping a cat may not actually even constitute a religion in the eyes of the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has never defined what is a religion, but it is sometimes hinted at what is not a religion. One person alone worshiping something very strange may not constitute a religion in their view. Having said that, though, let me give you the facts of Thomas. The facts of Thomas are very sympathetic. Thomas is a Jehovah's Witness, and one of the things that Jehovah's Witnesses must commit themselves to is they must not aid countries in war. They must not aid countries in war. They cannot participate in war on any level. This was Mr. Thomas's job. He was working at a steel sheeting factory, which means that there are these large sheets of steel that come down this conveyor belt, and he's that guy who's responsible for cutting them a certain size. So he's working with heavy machinery. He has to cut these large pieces of steel sheeting. Where does the steel sheeting go? It's going to go down the conveyor belt, and sooner or later, that big sheet of steel is going to be turned into a turret, and that turret is going to be placed on a military combat tank, and it's going to be used to go blow human beings to 1,000 pieces. That's Thomas's job. Now, remember, his job is basically just cutting the steel sheeting. One day, his supervisor tells him, listen, Eddie, that's actually his name, Eddie Thomas. Eddie, no more cutting the steel for you. We need a guy over there in the turret, where they turn the steel sheeting into the turret. We need some guy over there. He's not working there anymore, so we need a little extra help there. Can you go over there? And he says, no can do, boss. I'm Jehovah's Witness, and I cannot help I cannot participate in war and that turning the turret. I mean, think about it. I can't do that. And then the supervisor said, what do you think you're doing now by cutting the steel sheeting, which is going down there, being turned into a turret, blowing? What do you think you're doing now? He says, I know it seems weird to you, boss. And this is the part that might be important, responsive to your earlier question. I know it seems weird to you, boss, but to me, as a Jehovah's Witness, it's a long moral way between cutting the steel sheeting and then, just walking a few pieces there and then turning it into a turret. It's a long moral. I can do this. I can't do that. And then the supervisor said one more thing. Did you know, this is in fact true, and during the trial it was discovered, did you know there are two guys there now who are also Jehovah's Witness? who are doing that now. Did you know that? I know they're cool with it. I can't do it. I just can't. It's part of my own interpretation of the Jehovah's Witness religion. Now, that was brought up at the Supreme Court level, and Chief Justice Burger said the following. Even if the religion makes no sense to the judges themselves, as long as it makes sense to that person, it's fine. And in fact, even if it doesn't make any sense to the rest of the Jehovah's Witnesses, it's totally fine. And Burger said that we don't know what's going on in the mind of that religious person. Maybe he has it right and everyone else has it wrong. Who knows? But we cannot, just because that person has an eccentric religious view, we cannot sort of dismiss it out of hand. Those are the two exceptions. Watch for the hybrid view. This is when the Yoder example, when the free exercise clause is denied by the government, presumptively denied by the government, plus some other constitutional right has been violated, and then the Thomas situation where someone is forced to choose between you want your unemployment benefits or you want to worship your God. That's totally out of the question because you're coercing that person.
In the Yoder example, why couldn't you get there strictly by the 14th Amendment?
You could have done that too. You know, that's an excellent question. It's a much cleaner sort of way to get what you want. It could have happened that way too. Just the court, for reasons that are sort of idiosyncratic and kind of goofy, just decided to go for both. I think Chief Justice Burger wanted to make a statement about how the Constitution protects religious groups as well, and saw it as a good political opportunity to sort of expound on that. But you're right, this would have been a much easier way, wouldn't it? I agree with that. Those are the two examples thinking about. Oh, and here's a good question for you. If I give you this question, if that's true, why did Smith versus Oregon Employment Division, why did that come out differently? Why is Eddie Thomas going to get him his own unemployment benefits, but why in the case of Smith, is Smith not going to get his unemployment benefits? What's the difference between the two?
Quitting and firing.
Can you explain? Yeah, and also think about the violation of the criminal law. Thomas, he never violated a criminal law. He said, boss, no can do on this. I'm going to just quit. I'm sorry. I can't do it. So he just did this. Smith, he broke a criminal law in the state of Oregon by smoking the peyote. He broke a criminal law. Does everyone see that? That's one distinction. So there was a sound basis in the Smith case for the unemployment office to say, we don't give unemployment benefits to people who are criminals. You just confessed to a crime. We're not going to reward you by giving you money for having committed a crime. In Eddie Thomas's case, though, he never committed a crime. He just picked up his stuff and said, boss, I'm really sorry because I like my job. I'm going to go home now. He didn't commit a crime. He just couldn't do the job anymore because of religious reasons. That's one distinction that's worth thinking about. Does anyone have any questions so far in the free exercise clause? If not, we're going to move to the Establishment Clause. The Establishment Clause prohibits the government from establishing religion. It prohibits the government from establishing religion. That phrase establishing, though, is kind of misleading. It basically means it prohibits the government from favoring religion over either non-religion or some particular religion. Let me repeat that. The Establishment Clause basically prohibits the government from favoring religion over non-religion or favoring one religion over other religions. It basically prohibits the government from favoring religion over non-religion or favoring one religion over other religions. Everyone understand? Okay. Here's what you write first again. If you're going to see an Establishment Clause issue on your essay exam, you write, the Establishment Clause prohibits Congress from establishing a religion or preferring religion over non-religion. Now, if the law was passed by the state or local government, just say that Everson versus School Board applied the Establishment Clause to the states. Everson versus School Board applied the Establishment Clause to the states. How does it work? Establishment Clause is much more complicated than Free Exercise Clause. The reason it's much more complicated is because there's so many different tests for Establishment Clause. Free Exercise Clause, you already know what the test is. If religion and non-religion are treated exactly the same, it'll be subject to rational review. If they ain't, if religion is somehow disadvantaged, then at that point we're going to apply strict scrutiny. Establishment Clause is so much more complicated. The reason it's complicated is because the Supreme Court, they have several different tests for Establishment Clause, and they never quite agree exactly which test they're going to agree on as a majority. But one test still endures. It's called the Lemon Test. The Lemon Test still endures. This is the test I want you to focus on for the bar exam. This is the test I want you to focus on for the bar exam. The bar exam does not test any other test. It just tests lemon test. It just tests lemon test for establishment clause. There are many other tests out there. Sometimes it's mind-boggling how many other tests are out there. But these have always been floated by pluralities on the Supreme Court, like 3 guys or 4 guys who are doing this, but never quite commanding 5 guys, which is a majority. The only test that's ever commanded a 5-person majority has been the lemon test. That's why this is going to be the only test that's going to be tested on the bar exam. Now, exactly how does the lemon test work? In theory, it sounds very simple, and in practice, it's really weird. In theory, it's very simple. There's 3 different parts to it. In order for a law not to violate the Establishment Clause, it has to satisfy 3 requirements. In order for a law not to violate the Establishment Clause, it has to satisfy 3 requirements. The first thing is the law must have a secular purpose. The law must have a secular purpose. Number 2, the law's primary effect must be neither to advance nor inhibit religion. The law's primary effect must be neither to advance nor inhibit religion. In other words, the law must have a secular effect. And then lastly, the law must not excessively entangle government in religion. The law must not excessively entangle government in religion. We're going to go over each one of these and take a look at some examples about how they're going to work. First of all, the law must have a secular purpose. What is not a secular purpose? Let's look at the first example there, page 4. This is Arabic number 1, and then the first example. A law that required every public school classroom to post the 10 Commandments, that's not a secular purpose. Even if the government says, okay, you know why we want them commandments up there is to teach young folk about good morality. No, if you wanted to teach them good morality, just say, don't do these things, but then don't say like the Lord commands you not to do these things. That's it. Just take them out then. If that's what so that would not be permitted. There's no secular purpose behind that. Second thing, a law requiring teachers to hold a 1-minute session during class for prayer or meditation by students. There's no secular purpose behind that either. Some schools are trying to some schools in places like Alabama and Louisiana, they try to get away from the Establishment Clause prohibition by saying, now we're going to have 5-minute time for reflection. During the time for reflection, we want those of you of the faith to think about your God. And for those of you who are not of the faith or no faith, just use that time to, yoga or whatever you people do. That's a violation of the Establishment Clause. And the court has already said that this is not me coming up with examples. This is the U.S. Supreme Court's decision. That is not a secular purpose because the chief purpose for doing something like that is to aid opportunities for religious people to engage in prayer. There's no secular purpose behind doing something like that. You can have quiet time, but you can't say this time is meant for religious people to reflect, plus, the heathen people to reflect on their own as well. That's never permitted, never permitted. Here's what you can have. And I'm sure everyone's familiar with this. You can have quiet time in class. You can have quiet time. Do you remember at kindergarten? You can have quiet time. That's okay. That is always okay. Because there's a secular purpose behind that. We want all you crazy sugar-addicted children just calm you down. Just calm you down. Give the teacher a little break. Let me go get a cigarette. Just calm you down. That's totally okay. But sometimes in the language they'll say to give an opportunity for religious people to pray and for the heathen people to do yoga. That's never permitted. Totally never permitted. The third one, a law requiring public school teachers to teach creation science. That's less popular now than it once was, maybe 10 years ago. If the teachers also teach biological evolution. Let me explain something about this. This might come up on the bar exam. Creation science is the view that there is scientific evidence for the existence of God. And the way they prove it is by doing the following, that if you think about all the incredible things in life, like how am I here standing around like this as a human being instead of some rock somewhere in Arizona? The only explanation for that is God. There's no other explanation except God himself. That's basically their argument, that it's too incredible to imagine science putting all this together. Or just pure chance. Someone has got to have put this together, like an intelligent being, intelligent design or creation science. Some schools have said that as long as we can teach creation science for 30 minutes in bio, and for the next 30 minutes, we're going to teach the heathen bio. If they do that, can they get away with it? They can't get away with it. Because there's no secular purpose behind that. Watch for that in the bar exam where they try to have their cake and eat it too by saying, okay, we're not against biology in Birmingham. We're not against that. We're saying that complement the biology, if you will, with creation science. Just make it even. Just make a little balance. That's totally out of the question. Totally out of the question. Absolutely, totally out of the question in the eyes of the Supreme Court. There's no secular purpose behind it. There's no secular purpose. You're trying to apologize to the kids who don't believe in it by saying, we're going to get to you in just one set. We're going to get to them first. I mean, totally out of the question. There's no secular purpose behind it. The next one, posting the 10 Commandments inside the county courthouse, absolutely not a secular purpose. This actually happened in Kentucky. The judge wanted to post the 10 Commandments inside the courthouse. Again, the argument was that I just want to promote morality. If you want to promote, don't say God says. On the other hand, though, if you want to put the 10 Commandments in a less conspicuous place on the courthouse, that actually might be okay in the eyes of the Supreme Court. Like move it like way far away from the courthouse, so that no one could actually associate are those crosses meant to be associated with that courthouse? If you move them really, really far away, so no normal human being could make the association, that might be okay. But if you put it inside a courthouse, it's just if you're a Muslim and you go before that, if you're a Satanist or Muslim or some other person who, if you're Jewish and you go before that and you see this big, huge cross there with the 10 Commandments, I mean, you're already thinking to yourself, I'm dead. Or if you're atheist, I'm dead. That's not going to be permitted. Which one of the following is a secular purpose? This is from McGowan versus Maryland in 1961. Laws requiring businesses to close on Sundays and Sundays alone, that's actually okay. Laws requiring businesses to close on Sundays and Sundays alone, that's actually okay. And if you're wondering, but I mean Sunday, isn't that the Christian Sabbath? Saturday is the Jewish Sabbath. I mean, it's not really a secular purpose. This is what the court said. Look, if they've been doing that, I mean, they've been doing that for a long time in the United States, and everyone just takes Sunday off and watches football, and so it's not really even religious, so it's totally fine. That's exactly what the court said. They said they've been doing this a long time, and no one really, a lot of people don't even go to church, and it's kind of traditional. It's fine. It's totally secular. That's actually okay. Widely accepted, for example. That's one of the factors you're looking for. Primary effect must be neither to advance nor inhibit religion. What advances religion? Watch this. A law prohibiting an employer from requiring a law prohibited any employer from requiring her employee. I'm trying to say employer twice. I'm sorry. A law prohibited any employer from requiring her employee to work on the employee's Sabbath. The Supreme Court said that this violated the Establishment Clause because its primary effect was to advance religion at the expense of non-religion. Atheists or agnostics, they don't have a legal right to be exempted from work in this way. So that there's no secular effect to something like that. Does everyone see that? Okay. What does have a secular effect, however? A federal law prohibits discrimination by private employers against employees because of the latter's religion. However, this isn't that true. The law permits one exception. Religious groups may discriminate in their hiring in terms of the employee's religion. Religious groups can discriminate against people on the basis of religion. So, for example, if a Mormon church, they said, we would like to hire a teacher for our Sunday services, and we would like the teacher to be Mormon. And you're great. I mean, you have all the credentials. You're really fantastic. But you're not Mormon, so I'm going to discriminate against you and not hire you. They can get away with that. The federal law says they can get away with that. The church will not be subject to a discrimination lawsuit. They can get away with that. And here's the religious purpose behind that. If you want, what's the religious? Here's the secular purpose behind that. The secular purpose is the following: we want to make sure that religious groups are able to exercise the free exercise clause rights under the Constitution. But if you have the government saying, you're a Catholic church, but you only want to hire Catholics to work at that church for church-related activities, you can't do that in the United States of America. We're going to tell you who to hire. That would be violating their free exercise clause rights. Does everyone understand that? That's why there's this exemption saying that if it's for a church-related duty, you can go ahead and discriminate. Sunday school teachers, for example, a priest. The federal government, no state government is permitted to pass a law saying Catholic churches must now hire priests who belong to some other faith, because otherwise it would be discrimination. That would never be permitted. That would violate both the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. And then the excessive entanglement, watch this too. This is the third prong of the Lemon Test. There are so many Supreme Court cases dealing with what to do with funding to religious schools, government funding to religious schools. And basically, in a nutshell, giving cash to religious schools, usually that involves excessive entanglement. Giving cash to religious schools, government cash to religious schools, usually involves excessive entanglement. And the reason is because that cash, it cannot be used for non-religious, it cannot be used for religious purposes. When the government gives money to a private school, like a private Catholic school, and says, here's a big wad of cash, just don't teach religion with this cash. Like don't like use this cash for like religion time. You know what I'm saying? Just use it for like math or something like that, or physics or something, okay? Just do me a favor. Do you know why that's excessive entanglement? It's because someone from the government office has to constantly be at that Catholic school and like monitoring them. Using my cash. You can't use my cash for that. Someone has to be constantly monitoring them. That's going to involve excessive entanglement, because then the government is in charge of determining, okay, I get to determine for you Catholics here what is a religious issue and what is a non-religious issue. And I'm the one who's going to make that determination. The difficulty with that is the following. I'll give you one example, a true life example from when my kid was going to a Baptist fundamentalist school in Bowling Green, Kentucky. This is actually true. Long story for how she ended up there. Her teacher, the teachers were fantastic. Fantastic teachers at that Baptist fundamentalist school. And one of the teachers, Miss Harris, she taught my daughter the idea of infinity, because when you do fractions, as you get closer and closer to zero on that ruler, in theory you can keep putting notches in between that zero, and you keep going until infinity. And so she was trying to teach my daughter about infinity. She said, well, Carissa, infinity is sort of like, in math, it's sort of like what God is. There's no beginning to God. There's no end to God. God just is. That's the way sort of like is in infinity in math. And then that's the way my daughter, oh, now I get it. It was like this. If you have a government lawyer there constantly supervising, whoa, time out. What'd you say? You're getting paid? What you talking about? Infinity? Like, no, whoa, give me my money back. That's excessive entanglement. That is excessive. And that's why the government does not want to give cash to those people, is because they're thinking, I mean, someone has to be there all the time monitoring these people to make sure the cash is not used for religious purposes. Does everyone understand that? Excessive entanglement. Now, we've covered the free exercise clause. We've covered the establishment clause. We've only covered the bare basics. The people who are not my students, is that basically what was covered in your classes as well? It was, yes?
Yeah, I liked it better the way you explained it.
Oh, you're too kind. You're too kind.
We needed for the bar and concise and clear.
Yeah, you're too kind. But I'm glad it was. And my students, Chriselle?
I do have one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
And it goes back to the secular effect.
Yes.
You said that the purpose behind the law was so that religious groups can exercise the freedom of religion under the U.S. Constitution. So basically, the secular effect was to uphold the rights under the Constitution. In a general sense, that's the secular effect. Because when you put religion in there, it seems non-secular.
This is the example regarding how the church may discriminate against against non-believers if it wants to hire them for like religious. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, I should have started with that. So the non-secular effect, or no, the secular effect is basically to uphold the rights under the Constitution, regardless if they're religious or not. It just happens to be that they're religious in this case.
Well, I mean, under the free exercise clause, it says that government shall not infringe a person's right of religious free exercise. If the government says, nah, you can't hire a Catholic priest for your Catholic church, but you got to hire someone who's non-Catholic to be fair, that would be violating the Catholic Church's right of religious free exercise. It would also not be furthering a secular effect, because at that point, I mean, yeah, at that point, the government has to decide, what does religion mean to the Catholics, and I'm going to decide for them. You can still be a Catholic, you just don't need Catholic priests to be in your church. It looks Catholic to me. You have the government making this decision about Catholicism that they're not entitled to do. Does that make sense? Okay. I think that's a good question, because I don't think I explained that as clearly as I wanted to. Everyone good? Okay. Let me go get Amar. Is he supposed to come in here? You don't know, right? What's happening next? Okay, awesome. All right, guys. Good luck. Good luck with it. And then let me know how it goes, okay?
Thank you.
Sure.